Welcome back to Gray Squadron Gaming, everybody. We've got a couple special guests, as you can see. We have Will Squared, if you will, from AMG. I'll let Will introduce themselves before we get started.
Oh, but which Will has to go first? I'm going to say Pagani has to go first.
Oh, all right. I am Will Pagani. I am the development director. There's a lot of titles. I don't know. The professional cat wrangler is going to be
Hmm.
what I do at Atomic Mass Games, keeping all the
Oh,
devs
yeah.
in line and keeping all the games functioning and that kind of stuff, and moving forward. And yeah, that's what I do. It's fun.
And
I love
I'm you do love it. You all the time. And
it.
I'm Will Shick. I am the VP of Creative Direction and Development and Strategy. That's what it is. I can't steal Dallas's title though I want to, because usually creative director always goes together. But creative development and strategy. So effectively, if Pagani wrangles the cats, I wrangle the cats, the dogs, the sheep, and the cows, all together to make sure that we make beautiful music together. So I get to oversee all of the different various facets of game creation and production at a tongue mess. And we have a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Well, we are really glad to have you guys here at the end of the year to cap off with one last set of questions. For the viewers who don't know, we always ask our Discord and the community at large for some questions to give to the Wills or Will, depending who we have on the call. And so I'm going to go through our questions. If your question's not asked, nothing personal, we're just going to ask so many at a time. So we'll jump in. I'm going to start with some Shatterpoint questions, and then we'll move on to Legion
Mhm.
as we get through a little bit. But we'll start with SharePoint has really grown just in the first year, just in the scope of not just how many minis we have, but how many errors we have. And one of the questions people are wondering about, and it's a future thing coming out, possibly, maybe not, but do we know if you guys are planning or have any interest ever to look at other eras, like sequel eras or just Old Republic? Is there a chance it could go past where it's at now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we talk a bit about this every time we discuss like Shatterpoint and how the squad building works and everything, but it really is a system that allows for us to explore all the different kind of niches or niches within the Star Wars galaxy. And one of the wonderful things about it and the way in which we designed it from the squad building perspective was that, with a game like Legion, where you have to have a whole faction that's fully fleshed out and can fill a commander slot and, three core options and then have special forces and yada on and on and on, right? It takes a lot of effort. But with Shatterpoint, you really just need a squad. And if you want to create a thematic and canonical strike team within that era, you can make two squads, but then you're kind of done. So it does really provide this flexibility that is wonderful when it comes to like doing some of the off the beaten track kind of things or being able to explore. So like sequel trilogy is definitely something that I envision would be in the future for the game, Old Republic, I think everyone wants to see that. Whether or not that becomes a thing that, becomes viable based on a number of different factors, who knows? But like we all played Knights of the Old Republic, and we can't wait to
Yeah.
get a Revan on the table or something like that if that's possible. Um, and then whatever else like LFL and Star Wars goes to next, like the wonderful thing about skirmish games and Shatterpoint is that nothing's impossible. Whereas other systems or army construction might require a large amount of things. Really, Shatterpoint needs three, and
Okay.
you can kind of dabble into that. So, some of the video games properties like Jedi Fallen Order and things like all of that stuff
Oh my
is
gosh, Shatterpoint.
potentials.
So fun.
It doesn't mean just because we're saying the names that it's
Sure.
necessarily on the
No, right.
schedule, but like, again, nothing's really off the table, right? If we have the ability and the chance to do it, I think on a long enough timeline, with the game and everything, we'll get to explore those things, and we'd love to do it because it just brings more interest and flavor into the game in general.
Yeah. And one of the things I love that you guys did just recently, not too long ago at least, was you brought Bo and Hermandos to more
Mhm.
eras. So now you can make a full Mandalorian team, which I played on the channel and was a ton of fun. He
Yeah,
didn't have as
you
much fun playing
you
against
uh
it,
you destroyed me in like
but it was
20
really,
minutes.
really fun and
It
thematic.
was bad.
Um, so someone in our community asked, with that in mind, do you guys have any plans maybe to like do that to some other characters? For example, a lot of questions about Hondo. Hondo keeps coming up because they would like to see him in other eras. Is that something you guys play with in the background or kind of, battle test, etc.?
So one of the things that led to the Bo-Katan kind of decision to increase the eras is, we talk a lot about Shatterpoint being a snapshot in time of a character, and our goal, our ideal, right, is that if we're going to do a character, in a different era, if they have a uniquely different storyline or through line or something else to it, then it's worth, exploring that with a brand new unit with its unique rules and all that stuff. However, we are bound a lot by time constraints and, our timelines are long and everything else. So, with Bo, we kind of looked at everything and said, okay, we're not going to be able to hit a full Mandalorian force with, a Mandalorian season 3 Bo-Katan and everything else in a timeline that would really be reasonable or exciting. And we did that reevaluation on Bo and said, all right, well, really, if you look at her throughout the different media, up until season 3, she has a pretty straight through line.
Mhm.
The Bo-Katan we see in the Clone Wars is the Bo-Katan we see largely, in other places, especially in Mandalorian season 2,
Mhm.
where we're first introduced or reintroduced back to her. So let's just go ahead and make that change, and we don't feel like we're losing anything because even if we made another Bo-Katan, it would be a primary, more than likely, and we would never make another secondary Bo-Katan. And so as far as those other characters, right, like Hondo and Naka, or a Cad Bane, for instance, I think it comes down to um, the idea of like, and Pagani can talk a little bit about this portion of it, but there is a game component to it. What's going to be best for the game experience and environment, and does expanding those eras or those options have meaningful impact to players' lists and the way in which the game is experienced? And then, of course, there's the question of if we do that, if we, for example, said Hondo as a primary can now go to all these different eras, does that close us off from making another Hondo? And if we made another Hondo for like the Rebels era, right, where he's a bit older and not any wiser, is that a Hondo that would be a primary, right? Because more often than not, we try not to fill the same slot with the same character, especially if they share eras, right? Because you want that choice. If you look like Ahsoka Tano, for instance, is a really great one. And at the start of the game, you have your primary version, you have your secondary version, and those provide very different play choices and options for building the squad.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's army construction in general in Shatterpoint is very specific. So once you start bringing, especially primary characters into other places, and especially people that are very flexible like Hondo and what they can play with and what they can play around, it can get very exciting. Uh, yeah, very exciting, very fast as new combos become available and new things like that. So it's 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 not as easy as just like calling up graphic design and being like, "Yo, put this thing on there." Great, it works now. There's a lot of little permutations you got to check and a lot of different interactions that you got to check that were not available before when you were forced into a specific era for one of your two squads. So,
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then, kind of in the same area of the question, will we see like alternate sculpts of just some individual characters like we've seen with MCP and some Spider-Man? We had, different sculpts for the same actual character. Are you guys thinking about doing things like that with Shatterpoint for maybe just one or two characters for like a
It's
uh,
certainly possible, right? I mean, we love AMG kind of foundationally, right, as a miniatures company. We make miniatures. There's a game attached to them. The game is very important, but the games are nothing without the miniatures, right? So everyone internally is all very much a hobbyist, and Pagani spends all of his time painting terrain, which is a little weird, but that's what he loves to
yeah,
do.
we
don't even
can't see
So he
that.
always has
it's
he has
blurred. Don't
gorgeous
look at it.
gorgeous tables, but never a painted character to play on them with. Um, so, but yeah, so I think there's always an opportunity if we have the option and the chance to do something cool or unique. We want to dive in and do that. I think we've learned a lot of lessons from Crisis Protocol and how maybe to flex doing alternate sculpts in an exclusive mode or not, and making them available, and what players really value out of that and what they want to do. So I think it's not impossible. It's probably likely, but how and when that'll get exercised is really, we try to make sure that anything we're doing is offering value and something that's going to make all of the players excited, or at least the vast majority of players excited. We'll never make everybody happy. That's just the way it works.
No, it's true.
I think there's also a large component of it, right? Is do we want to make new rules for this, or can we make new rules for this? Like, do we have time in the schedule to make new rules for it? Because if we can, like, I'm of the opinion that people want more new characters, not necessarily just redone characters. So that's part of the discussion as well, is do we want to do that? Is there a space to do that? Can we get the developers to do that, right? Like, do they have time? So that's also a very heavy part of the discussion that every time when we are looking at these things, that comes up as well.
Yeah. And then one of our patrons asked that when you are developing characters for Shatterpoint or Legion, this is kind of just a general question, and let's say Skeleton Crew's coming out, do you guys ever get heads up or try to build around that? Like, okay, we know the show's coming out. We saw some concept art. We're going to try to get it out somewhere around that time frame, or does it really kind of happen afterward for you guys?
It's a little mixed. Obviously, with the You Cannot Run dual pack, that was a big collaboration that we did with LFL for the Obi-Wan show, and
Mhm.
they gave
Inquisitors as
us,
well.
yeah, and the Inquisitors, yep. And they gave us some heads up, and those projects are always interesting. Kind of talk a little bit about all the unique clown code names that we had for those guys and how we have to do it. But so we do sometimes get heads up and early access. Those projects are pretty difficult though because our timelines are much longer than show timelines.
Mm.
So we have a portion of the picture, but not all the picture. And when those cases we have to, so it leads us to be pretty choosy about, okay, can we do something well with what is available, or do we need to wait until more of the picture becomes available? And then typically by the time we get that intel, we're a bit behind the main show, like a Skeleton Crew or anything like that. But our partners at LFL are very good about letting us know what opportunities are coming. And then the dialogue really becomes, okay, this sounds cool. What can you give us now so that we can be ready for it at the time? And I think really in the history of Star Wars games in general, there has not been many times where those things have lined up. There was the Resistance bomber with X-Wing, which FFG was able to do kind of right around the same time as the release of Last Jedi. And then we had the Obi-Wan one, and I think those are the only two that were pretty close to day and date. And so it kind of just showcases how difficult the two timelines trying to meld together and then being able to do something effectively
Right.
can be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's another one in Destiny from Fantasy Flight as
A
well.
two-player set, you're right.
Ray Kylo Ren set, I
Yeah,
think.
I
But
forgot about
yeah,
that.
it's exciting getting the projects like that. I remember back when we were doing the Obi-Wan show one, because we have to codename everything, right? And you have to codename things in a way that just are complete non sequiturs. So it's like pie in the face is one of the rules or something. Because we did all clown themed stuff for the
Mhm.
we had like seltzer bottle and just all sorts of stuff. And because you can't have anyone be like, oh, well, he's angry, so he's Darth Vader, right? Like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
no, it's got to be something completely wild.
When you
And
play after
then,
that, do you ever in your head go, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do the seltzer," but I mean now you can run.
yeah,
Did you ever
no,
do
for
something like
sure.
that? Yeah.
For sure, yes.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. And then my personal favorite part was before we kind of revealed to the studio, because this is for internal playtest and everything, right? This isn't just like external stuff.
Mhm.
Is the can you guess which character is which, like after, like just based on the rules, right? So like, did we get the flavor right? And you have to be like, Happy Sunshine is actually Darth Vader. Like that kind of stuff, right? So it was a really fun little mini game. We got to play with a lot of the internal playtesters.
Mhm.
I enjoyed doing that a lot. That was a lot of fun.
That sounds fun.
But
That sounds fun, yeah.
Yeah.
But also
and
very hard,
then
right? Because we lean so much into theme and we can't tell you as a
yeah.
playtester or a person, right? Like what is the theme of the thing that we are playing so that you can't give feedback on that. So
That part is hard.
Yeah,
it's hard, but enjoyable.
with that project, I think there were 5 people internally who actually knew what we were doing.
Oh wow.
Yep.
It was Kevin who was sculpting everything and doing the engineering just by himself, which is pretty rare. It was myself, Simone, Dallas, Plumber knew, and I think Dallas knew, and that was basically it. Oh,
Yeah,
Preston
I
knew
didn't
as
know for a
well.
long time.
Oh
Like
wow.
Yeah,
as
and
Plumber's
Pagani came
Clock,
in
I still
later.
didn't know.
That's funny.
So, those kinds of projects, there's a lot of things to them, and it's kind of funny to play the Cloak and Dagger game. Like we would have to take our playtest out of the normal playtest room. We playtested in the corner of our warehouse, under kind of lock and key. It looked like some kind of bad police movie bust was going to go down as we're like
Yeah.
playing in the corner, talking
Yeah.
about these things. You have to be very careful not to actually say the real names if you know them to other people. So there's a lot that goes into it because obviously, well, it's not that we're particularly worried about leaks coming out of the studio or anything. You want to show that respect and honor the kind of the value that your partners and our partners at LFL are giving us with this early access stuff. Because if by some horrible way it did leak,
Right.
and it was us, right? Not only would I feel terrible, but also there would be significant consequences of that. So it's really important you take this stuff very, very seriously, because you want to maintain that relationship. And so again, there's a lot that goes into it. We do get heads up. They are great partners in that way. We don't get to flex it as much as maybe we would love to, just based on how it kind of works. But it also there's a lot of stuff that goes into it that makes it much harder to do and do effectively as well.
It's a little comical hearing you saying how serious it is, but then you guys called it like seltzer water and pie in the face.
Yeah.
Like it's just kind of a funny tangent there. So serious.
Yeah.
The pie in the
Yes.
face move. No, that's great. We're gonna kind of shift to Legion and we'll go back and forth a little bit. But this question
Mhm.
came up, probably the most asked question I got personally for to ask you was around the charge, relentless, and steady change for Legion. So we're shifting gears a little bit. People were kind of curious. I'm wording this my own way. It was worded many different ways, but outside of the standard interaction of like, let's say like a standby or how people would do it normally, like, with Luke might move into melee, take a standby, then if someone's swing, he gets to swing back, right? Was it
Sure.
done to help stop that too? Or was it mainly done, they wanted to know with Yoda and like Bad Batch and guidance kind of portray, or did you kind of look at it holistically?
We definitely looked at it holistically, right? Like the Yoda Bad Batch was kind of the one at the front line of the meta that was being played a whole bunch, but of course we looked at it through all of the Jedi interactions and the standbys that they can do. Uh, we looked at all of it, right? And the playtesters were very helpful in pointing out all sorts of situations where we were like, oh, we didn't even think of that. But yes, that's great. Or, oh, no, okay, what can we do about that? Do we need to change this? Like, how can we address that? We went through a few iterations of it. Uh, and for a while, like Relentless still worked because we were like, man, that's really cool that like Relentless is like really in there. And then we just ended up being like, look, we're removing this for clarity, we're removing this for balance, we're removing this for design space. Like we just got to get rid of all of it. And whereas, yes, some of the intricacies and deep complexities are gone now. Hopefully, the game is more accessible and approachable, and more things when you read them do what they say they do. Is kind of always a big thing for me, right? Like I want players when they read a rule to not have to go like 3 levels down to be like, oh, this actually does this, right? I just want you to be able to read the rule and be like, oh, that's what it does. Uh, and that was, I think, the largest offender that was kind of left after our cleanup a long time ago. Gosh, when was that? 2022, I think, was the first big rulebook cleanup.
For the
This was
core
kind
rule
of one
book,
that's
yeah,
been on
that's
our
about
radar
right.
for this one's been on our radar for a long time, and we were finally like, okay, well, with this Yoda Bad Batch stuff going on, we may as well pull the trigger on it. So,
I mean, I think there's another part to the timing on it too, which is that we had just done, this big unit refresh. We had rebalanced a lot of things around it, and we don't know, right? The truth is was it an unintended kind of consequence of the rules being written, or did the original designers actually mean for Jedi to be able to do this, right? And for it to become a really powerful play pattern with them to be able to utilize standbys with these keywords. From our standpoint, going through all of the process, it was, as Pagani said, right, something that we didn't really feel had a place in the game in terms of how kind of loopholey it felt, how it could be a gotcha. Also, just in terms of the play pattern that we wanted to see in general out of those units. The first thought that we ever had when it was like, should this have relentless? Should this have charge? Wasn't, oh, now it can do this funny standby thing, right? And so with that too, right, we were kind of able to, even if certain things previous to our stewardship of the game had been point costed or balanced ability wise around that, we were able to make sure that that change would not adversely affect them under the new point costing or things like that, right?
Sure.
To a given value of success. That's, again, these are living games. And of course, as we always say, we're not going to get everything perfectly on the nose the first time or even the fifth time, but that's why we have our April and November dates now. So I do think that's, it's another part of that puzzle is trying to figure out and knowing that now this should have a lower impact overall based on where the game is with this big rebalance and update.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
So another question we got from some of our Patreons were, With all the primaries that we have now, they're more based on capturing and contesting. Are we going to get some variations like the old recover the supplies or hostage exchange that have kind of one-off rules or more mobile play styles?
Without spoiling anything, yes.
That's
I'm pretty sure that's
okay.
is that spoiling something, Shick? I think that counts.
I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, you could spoil a little bit more than that,
Yeah.
but
Short answer, yes. Long answer, still yes. But I don't think we're ever going to get anything quite like bomb cart again. Bomb carts zooming around or particular hostages with units that deploy in weird ways or things like that, right? What one of the major goals of the primary missions for Legion is to create a little more consistency in what you're trying to do so that you can plan better. We saw lots of games in our when we were watching Worlds games, we were watching previous Worlds games, when we were watching all sorts of events, when we were looking at event coverage, all that kind of stuff, where you had, I think X-Wing uses the term zombie games, where like they're being played, but they're already over.
Yeah.
Like it's almost a foregone conclusion by turn two or something, but then you have to sit there and slog through it for three more rounds, right?
Right.
That's really something that we super do not want, and that happens a lot when you end up with very skewed objectives that have very specific requirements for how you can play them or what you can play.
Mhm.
So I think that's bullet point number one for this, and then bullet point number two for this also is we also are not huge fans of the players setting up the objectives necessarily, because then you get into that situation of like, oh, well, I know if I put this one here, then they have to put that one there, and if they don't put it there, they lose the game, and then we end up in the zombie game situation again.
Right.
We don't
That's
feel
fine.
like setting up the terrain or setting up the objectives or something like that should be that level of involvement inside of playing the game. And I realize that that is certainly part of playing the game, but this is
Mhm.
also why, like, when you show up to a tournament table, you don't set up the terrain yourself, right?
Yeah.
The objectives to me, in my mind, and how I see it, and I know how Andrew Dersom sees it as well, is the game should be played where the terrain and the objective is something that you are dealing with, not something you are controlling.
That makes sense. It's kind of like we played a lot of worlds and stuff too. We always go to all the big events and play them. And whenever someone flipped bombing run, for example, in the past, if you didn't have three speeder bikes or someone manned, that was the first flip we did. We're like, nope, nope, not doing bombing run,
Right.
right? Because you knew you lost before it started. If you
Mhm.
had like Vader and Dewbacks or whatever, you're probably not going to win against three
Yeah,
speeder bikes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and whereas we do hope that the missions give you different things that you can latch onto to build your army around, we're hoping to not skew it anywhere near as far as, say, Bombing Run or Hostage Exchange, where you like had to have a Force User with Force Push or Vader's Might or something like that to create these really one-sided games that
Yeah.
I didn't have very much fun playing them, and I don't think a lot of other players did either. But yes, we are looking to add more thematics and excitement, I guess, interesting things to scenarios in the future.
Awesome.
Okay. And then another question from one of our viewers was they're wondering about the design space is very advantageous and quite unique around the advantage cards, right? You guys kind of talked about a little bit ago that at some point we're going to get faction specific advantage cards. So whether this person knew that or not, I'm not sure. But they want to know, do you ever see something along the lines of like a divulge command card that will replace an active advantage with maybe like a character specific one? Like maybe they gave an example in the chat, like all Jedis gain this for one round or something along that line. So almost more of what you guys are already doing, but just kind of pinned down a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that space is pretty interesting, right? There's a lot that we can do with advantage cards. We can do unique ones for characters. We can do unique ones for factions, right? We can do unique ones for battle forces. All of these are options. We could certainly create a command card that swapped your advantage around, right? It could draw another one from your deck or something, right? So yeah, I think that's all space that we could explore in the future. And I think there's a lot of room there for us to play around in.
I'm really excited to see what you guys do with those faction specific ones because the
Yeah.
advantage cards are really fun. And some of them are really simple and they add something in the beginning, but there's so much space you guys could do with that. I have a feeling you're
Absolutely.
already doing that, but I can't wait to see it.
And shout out to full-size LCG cards. Give us a lot more room to put text on everything. Not that the objective is really the little ones, but there's also a lot more rules that we can write on those full-size cards that I personally am very excited about because I like being clear. So I use a lot of words.
That's
I
good.
made fun for it all.
I mean, we're still going to forget to read half of them when we play our games because that's what we do on this channel. But That's good. It's
You're
good.
not alone.
Sounds like every miniatures game I've ever played,
Right?
just in general. Like to this day, I still play games that I've been playing for 20 years, and I go, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's how that one works. That's
We
fine.
get to have
Move
the
on."
internet tell us every time we're like, you totally forgot that
Yep.
half of the rule you just played. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna hear this
Yeah.
80 times this week. This is gonna be great.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. That's, it's why you're the true heroes on the front line because you're willing to be like, this is exactly what all of you do in your games. You forget half the rules, but you don't put it on camera for everyone to like
Exactly.
be able to
And,
see and be like, oh yeah, you missed
nobody looks
that.
at a YouTube comment section before they write a comment on what rule you screwed up. So we hear it all the time for that whole week.
The whole line. Yeah.
So, as a droid player, semi-frequently, one of the things in the new rules that didn't get the range bump was coordinate. So why is coordinate still range 1 when everything else kind of bumped up to range 2?
The guidance, spotter, etc.
Yeah.
Sure. There are a lot of keywords. Remind me, coordinate's the one where you pass along an order, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it is incredibly more powerful than all of the other ones.
That's fair.
It's fair.
It's already not particularly difficult in the gameplay to set up a coordinate chain that will order the vast majority of your army. At range 2, it would be essentially trivial, I think, especially without requiring line of sight or something like that. So,
That's fair.
which I
I
don't
think
believe it
there's,
currently does. Once again, there's a lot of
yeah.
keywords.
I mean, there's also a thematics to it as well, which is, from the faction standpoint of CIS, where coordinate obviously is kind of the biggest thing. We want the droids to feel like they're restricted, right? We internally we often referred to them as they're the undead faction. So it's like this horde of underwhelming kind of troops, and they come back a lot, or they have a lot of reserves, and they have these really important linchpins, the commanders in the armies. And if you could remove, the necromancers, then the army kind of crumbles apart and all of that. And so I think by, whereas the clones are highly organized, highly equipped, very well trained, by playing with those distances, you do get more of that flavor feel of, okay, these people are well trained, they're well coordinated. This force is not. It's relying on some kind of tighter command and control and those kinds of things. So I think it also plays, well into the faction feel that we want, which is you have this horde of droids. They kind of stick together in these clumps. And then also, if you can remove those key figures, the commanders from the game, then you can start to really mess with their ability to perform the way the player wants them to. Um, has that all played out quite yet? I mean, I think we're still in the early days of it, but that was another one of the considerations when we talked about it, not just power level, but thematics as well.
That makes sense. Now, as someone who was a little on the fence about the giant course, adding, 4 or 5 people. I love it, by the way, now.
Yeah.
Totally bought in. I do it all the time to this poor guy.
Yeah.
But one of the questions we were getting was like the mercenary faction, like Black Suns, Pikes. I know we haven't seen all the updated cards yet until Adepticon-ish time frame, you said. But is that something you guys are looking at in the background to kind of maybe help those cores in like the Shao Collective? Or is that something you're keeping more to like factions that have like armies, like regimented armies and not so just mercenaries together?
You want this one?
Oh, you want me to do it? That's fine.
I'll happy to
That's
do
fine.
it.
I'm fine. I'm happy to be the bad guy. It's fine. It's who I am. It's why I'm here. Well, as far as the mercenary forces, right? We had a lot of discussions about the core sizes and the core choices, and um, if I'm correct, none of them made the cut for the bigger army sizes, and we did that intentionally for a couple of different reasons. One was, the ability for mercenaries to be splashed into different forces. What we found is if you could take a 10-man unit of pikes in your rebel forces, you wouldn't take the rebel troopers necessarily because you would just take the most efficient option, things like that. There are ways to play around it. So that was one of the reasons, was to just make them feel different. It also, as you mentioned, right? I think you hit on one of the big thematics that sold most of us, because again, as Pagani said, themes critical to us. We obviously take every measure we can to balance around power level and to make sure the game is fun and functional and a balanced experience. But at the end of the day, we want it to feel right. We want these different groups and battle forces and factions to feel correct. And the idea that, the Shadow Collective as this disparate group of kind of raiders and everything else, criminals and pulled together, wouldn't have these larger units. at least as far as what's there. It's not saying that in the future they might not get something. Um, Made sense to us, and it kind of kept the factions, the core four factions feeling good, the battle force for Shadow Collective feeling good. It made Mercenaries still more like feel like a good choice between the two different ones, and we felt like Shadow Collective really didn't lose much in our testing and the playtest feedback that we're getting and all of that. And maybe Pagani wants to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
some of the balance and testing that we got, but at the end of the day, that was kind of, there were a lot of different factors that went into it. But as far as the current Shadow Collective assortment of stuff, none of them are going to be seeing a larger unit size.
Man, no
Yeah,
25 to 8
whenever you're creating a unit of anything that can be taken by multiple factions, they can be taken by all factions, like the Pikes, right? You, as a designer and developer, you need to be very careful that those things never overshadow all of the other options inside of that faction, or really even any of the other options inside of that faction, because we have Black Suns have red saves. They're very good in close combat. Are we just going to see 10-man units of Black Suns instead of our troopers? Or I'm not sure they can go in that faction, but you get what I'm saying, right? It is, if we create Black Suns, we cannot create Sleeper Cell necessarily in Rebels or whatever. Did I just name both factions they don't work for?
You did.
You
You're
did.
batting
We're
a
nailing it.
thousand.
We're batting 1,000 today, boys.
Welcome,
But you
welcome
get what
to a
I'm saying. I'm
show where
talking
no one can
conceptually.
remember the rules and how the game works, apparently.
It fits in with
I
the
also
channel.
have not read the rule book, so here we go. No, but the idea is what I'm talking about here more than the specifics, right? Is when we create a mercenary unit that can go into a bunch of different places, you have to make sure that that unit does not overshadow the things that are meant for that faction, or you end up with all of my core choices that beyond the required ones are 10-man units of pikes. You also get into a situation where you can it's an order control situation as well, right? Can I jam how many of my points can I viably play in core inside of my army to homogenize my order pool, right? Like how many things can I do that? Great. Can I take capos and whatever to order all of them to blah 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 blah? Like it gets into a whole pile of weeds here. Pile of weeds? It's late. It's Friday. uh there's a lot of things that are up for like assessment when you are talking about units that can go into multiple factions, essentially. And one of the things that we wanted to set them apart with was they don't get these 10-man units, because then you can't necessarily just dump 600 points or something into your core and have a very standardized order pool, or know for a fact that you can just order your 2 vehicles and then everything else in your pool is core, right? So there were a lot of things that we thought about, both from a balance and thematic perspective.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I'm gonna kind of piggyback on one thing Will said. One of the ones.
Which one? Figure it out. Rewind the
other
tape.
one. The other one. You know, the other guy. Because there's a question coming up, so I'm going to cut to it now. They were curious if there's going to be anything else down the line, or is it a possibility? So we're not committing you to say anything yes or no. That Shadow Collective could see more units, and you kept saying current iteration of Shadow Collective. I noticed, so I'm just gonna let that go to you
let
guys.
let that marinate in the atmosphere.
Yeah, there you go.
I
I mean,
feel like that's an easy answer. You already answered.
that's true. I think it's, important to kind of point out, right? And we did say this at the front and everything else, like Shadow Collective, well, everyone loves them like a faction. They are not necessarily a faction. Mercenaries also are not a faction, right? Like the mercenary idea and Shadow Collective in general is kind of that idea that we can explore much like we had the discussion earlier. If you didn't skip that section about Shatterpoint, right? There's a lot of weird and cool little niches or niches. I like niche, but I know people say niche. So I'll say it both ways. And then the YouTube comments can argue about it in text, and it will have a lot of fun. It's a Pagani special. He'll jump into chats every time he says it's pronounced this, and he'll just spell the word, and it's like, yep, it sure is. But so the mercenary idea, right, and the battle forces kind of in general, but the way in which they interact with Shadow Collective especially, it allows us that freedom and flexibility to say, hey, wouldn't it be cool to go to Dathomir someday? Okay, well, how do you do that, right? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't become this sprawling like super faction that can take the best of everything and kind of meld it all together, right? We've seen this. We've seen mercenaries in a lot of different games and a lot of different systems, and we've definitely learned a lot of lessons about what not to do. So a lot of what we did with the mercenary system when we introduced it to Legion, and then with the battle force kind of like compartmentalization and saying, okay, Shadow Collective is a battle force, it's not necessarily a faction, was all done to try to avoid some of those major pitfalls that we had seen, where all of a sudden the tertiary mercenary characters or the scum and villainy of the world or the setting suddenly become better than every organized military force that you've ever seen, purely because they have the widest available options, right? It's very easy to make a lot of mercenary stuff. So if I can take units from Dathomir, like if the Witches of Dathomir someday, when and if they're made, are the best melee unit in the game, and I can take them and I can pair them with Black Suns, which are the best mid-range unit in the game, and then I can pair them with, whatever commander is the best commander, like mathematically in the
Load
game,
gray.
and I can take, sure, yeah, yeah, all those things. But you can
Gives
take,
Ewok.
you have the most options, so therefore you can find the best efficiencies, and then all of a sudden, those what are supposed to be not organized, factions, this group of disparate pirates and smugglers and whatever else, suddenly becomes the most powerful thing in the game purely because it has the most options and opportunity. So by bucketing things more closely, we're able to do that. And that means that, a lot of those niches or niches are limited. I'm going to just keep doing it.
Like Betty.
And so we try to be very clear about the fact that, like, a battle force, even for example, the Bright Tree Village battle force, right? It's a battle force. There's no guarantee that we'll see a lot of new Ewok stuff come out, for instance. There might be one or two things down the road, but you have gliders, catapults, maybe. Like there are a couple of things, but that doesn't,
trees with
again, if
The tree
if all
extent.
you ever are going to play is Ewoks, then the knowledge needs to be, okay, well, you're just not going to see the same rate of expansion or the same number of expansions as one of the core four factions, because the core four factions are the primary pillars of the game. And then everything else is kind of support and interesting and fun and exciting, and we love it, but it's just not going to see that same rate. Partially because of options and opportunities, partially because of just, what we need to leverage in terms of the players that we expect and the proportionate breakdown and things like that. And this is a long-winded way of saying, like, yes, we would love to go back to Shadow Collective, and we do have thoughts and ideas of what could be added to that faction. When will we see and get to those points? It's hard to say, but the door is never closed. However, right, the just setting more expectations and making sure that people understand that Shadow Collective is not the fifth faction. It won't see the same rate of growth and opportunity and, units that an Empire or a Republic will. Now, those units, of course, have secondary life or extra life by being mercenaries and being able to go into one of the four factions. There are absolutely, the potential of new battle forces that would utilize them, right? It's not hard to imagine someday seeing a Pike Syndicate only battle force, or seeing a Jabba the Hutt kind of scum and villainy Tatooine battle force. That would include some of those units, and then add Gamorrean guards and add Rancors, and who knows, right? All
Just
those things,
everything.
all those things are absolutely possible and things that we would love to get to.
Yeah.
But it's a different setup,
Yeah.
right? So will Shadow Collective get a new unit that might go to, 10 troopers, or maybe some weird number like 7.5 troopers? Absolutely.
I want a
Salacious
half
Crumb
trooper.
he's only like half a trooper, right?
There's like Lieutenant Dan running around there.
Yeah,
The
exactly. I
model just
mean, you're
doesn't
just
have
small.
legs.
Oh man, Heinrich,
Um,
you gotta pivot your time. So you're too busy making Gungans for us right now, but then maybe down the road.
and there's only so much Gungan stuff, let me tell you.
Ish.
Like, if you really go back and watch all the diversity in that scene, there's like guys who throw things and guys who have spears for
I
things,
mean,
and then
some
there's
of
a
them
couple
ride
guys who
off the
ride.
animal throwing the same.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's also a
And then
giant
there's
door with a shield on its
I
back.
like that one.
there is fun fact about those. One, they're massive, like massive, massive. And two, they only work in pairs. So it's not just one giant dinosaur, it's two giant dinosaurs to make a shield that
I
thematically would cover the entirety of the table
I don't see
and
the problem.
more.
I'm not.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
that one's
I
more
mean,
like a command card or something to get those
you
guys.
had me at two giant dinosaurs, right? I agree. We're there.
Oh, that's funny.
So in the realm of battle forces, one of the battle forces that seems to be suffering a little bit is the Imperial Remnant, especially with their turn one loss of ability to hand out extra tokens. Is that something that's getting looked at, or when you're looking at a battle force like that, is turn one that important to that battle force and extra units having tokens from their independent and not independent abilities?
Sure, yeah. I mean, all these things are constantly things that we're looking at, right? Is this working how we intended it? Was this on purpose? Does it still work? Like that kind of stuff, are things that we're constantly assessing. I consistently we go through everything and go, hey, does this need a touch? No, yes, no, yes, no, yeah, right? So whenever we get around to doing our next big push and big update, maybe there'll be an update in there for Imperial Remnant, maybe not. We'll run it through the developers, we'll run it through playtest, we'll see what they think.
Gotcha.
That's fair.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know. I
Wow.
can't see the future.
One of the questions we get a lot on the channel is we get a lot of people who find our channel randomly, right? Maybe they were watching Warhammer and they came over or whatever. So they're always asking how to get into the game. And one of the questions I've got the most from new players is right now, and I'm sure you guys are well aware of this, but just to ask this community can hear, they're having a hard time finding like a new box of B2s or finding a unit that they just aren't on shelves anymore. So they're wondering two things. One, I know you've announced some new resculpts, but do you foresee things that are, let's say, gone now, eventually coming back in some different shape or form? And two, what do you recommend to the newer players at this point who are trying to get into the game?
Sure. So just to take them in order, right? Obviously, we're in this transitional period. We're moving to a multilingual product, right? Which we talked about, which was part of the rebranding and the new visual design for the cards and everything else. Like a lot of that stuff was done so that Legion product in the future will have all the languages in it, which is something that we did with Shatterpoint. It's something that we moved to with Marvel Crisis Protocol. It's now something that we're moving to with Legion. So part of the pain of that process, right, is you basically pull back on the reprint levers because you need to move that stuff out of the stores so that retailers don't have two different looking products on the shelf, right? And one which is viewed as more valuable because it's more current, even if the miniatures in there are exactly the same and work exactly the same, right? We just as people value the new more than we value the old. Like, oh, well, that's the new one, it must be better. And granted, the new ones will have the multilingual cards in it. It has the new art. It has, all the new updated rules for that point in time. So there is some value to that, even if both of those products still work exactly the same on the table. Um, that means that, as we move forward and get closer to 2025, and the card packs coming out and all of this transition happening, there is going to be a period where certain things are just going to be out of stock, right? They won't stay out of stock forever, is kind of the big answer to the question, right? They will reappear. They'll emerge from their little chrysalis in the new Legion packaging with new multilingual cards and all that stuff. And that process will happen organically as those things move out and then come back in. Um, and then the second part of that is that obviously the second something's out of stock on a shelf doesn't mean that it's immediately going to appear in a month or two, right? There's a production process, there's shipping and logistics, there's all of that stuff that goes into it. So there may be moments where certain things are out of print for a little bit longer than not. Obviously, we will maintain and keep a close eye on that stuff. And if something winds up being longer out of print, we'll determine if that's going to be a problem from a competitive standpoint or a tournament viability standpoint. And we'll make those decisions organically as we go to make sure the game stays in the best and healthiest position it can be at all levels, right? And when it comes to just playing with somebody on the kitchen table or like at the game store for game night, it doesn't really matter. But when you get into things like GTs and open worlds and all of that, there's a bit more of a competitive advantage that can be gleaned from having access to something that somebody else doesn't.
Sure.
And, we'll address that if that becomes a thing depending on the timelines. So that is, if you're worried about that as a player or somebody who values competition, we are aware of it. We're going to monitor it and we'll do our best to make sure that the impact is not felt as we work through all of the different steps and stages of getting everything transitioned over. So hopefully that kind of answers that question. Like, the B1s will appear even if something is in hard plastic already, so it's not going to get a resculpt, but you can't find it. It's going to wind up in that new packaging. All of that process is going to happen over the course of the next many months through 2025 and probably into 2026. Um, just how the kind of the system goes.
Sure.
From the question of like how to start, I mean, I could kick that to Pagani and he could tell you what he would do if he was going to start.
Great. I mean, the current core boxes are phenomenal entry points for people looking for things before the new core boxes come. Uh, a lot of people suggest buying two of them and finding a buddy to split with, which I think is great because then not only do you have two full armies that you can each play against each other, you can also explore that hobby journey together. As a fantastic way to do it. And then from there, I would really explore as to what type of army you want to play, right? Like, what do you want to play? Like a really fast army that is going to use a lot of jet bike or speeder bikes and that kind of stuff, or are you going to play sort of a slow trudging army that uses B2s or the new riot troopers, which I personally love, for the record. I love playing the game. They're phenomenal. They hold the line super well. They get on objectives. They're hard to dislodge. I'm here for it. So try that out, Empire players. If you're new to the game, get in there. Give 'em a try.
And they're widely available.
And they're widely available, unlike the B2s, which are currently not, but they're coming soon. So
yeah, I mean Battle Force boxes, if you can find them, right? We did a limited print run of the Battle Force boxes, but I know some of them are still available. 501st might all be snatched up now, who knows? It's funny how, like, we always talk about planting seeds and then seeing them come to fruition later. Sometimes you know it, sometimes you don't. But the Battle Force boxes can be a great spot if one of those really tickles your fancy and you're able to find one. But like I said, I think I've seen them around. So depending on your local area, your store or whatever, you might be able to grab the one that interests you. That's another good start. As far as like just, but the cards are different and the rules are different and all of that, right? I think there's a big kind of statement that needs to be addressed, which is if you're new, you're brand new to the game and you really want to get in now, that's awesome. You can do it. And all of the materials are there for you. You need to go to the website and download the core rulebook and you need to download the new cards, right? So there are a couple more steps and there's steps that we want to eliminate and we're working towards that. But you also get in at a very exciting time, right? Like it's a whole new frontier out there. Everything's there for you. No one's asking you to buy a bunch of extra stuff, just to print a few things. And there's a wonderful community that's there to help you, right? I see it all the time. I see people asking that question on the Facebook or on X, or in the Discords or anything like that, right? And there's 10 or 20 people that'll jump in and they'll be like, well, here's what I would do if I was you. Here are the things to look at. Oh, you can't find
They're
this
usually
unit. Maybe
those
this
people
unit
on
would do
Facebook.
better. Yeah, and then there's fantastic podcast folks and hosts and community, like just paragons of the community out there. And I think, more importantly, the answer to the question is if you want to see this game continue to succeed and you want to have new players to play against and to bring into the tournaments and all of that, like there is a bit of an onus on you as an existing player to help walk them through that, and to be a little more patient as they kind of navigate that and be information bearers. If, you see somebody like picking up the course, they'd be like, oh yeah, it's an amazing game. They updated all these rules and they rebalanced everything. So like everything in that box is even better now. You just have to go download the rules from there. And they do that all the time, right? Every April and November now, we know that there's going to be a little game update and we're going to talk about the state of the game and if anything's changing and why it's changing and all of that. It's the thing that, gamers and miniatures like lifestyle players have wanted forever. We're trying to do it and we're doing it the best way we can with a printed product, which is a unique challenge, right? It is really difficult because without those cards, that player can't play that game right away. And that's another thing to remember too, is that a brand new player, the most of us started, if you started playing Legion, you played with what was in that box,
Yep.
what was in that starter, and it wasn't a problem. It made you fall in love with the game and it made you want to play more, right? Now, are the differences a bit more extreme these days than maybe 2 years ago when there was just a bunch of points updates and maybe some card erratas? Sure. It is, I'm not saying it's the same, but at the same time, right? A new player doesn't know, but the foundation of the game is the same. The enjoyment of the game is the same. There's cool new stuff to look into. And we, ideally, right, if you're still playing and you're still interested in the game, you believe that the vast majority of those updates, maybe not all of them, but the vast majority of them have been positive, have improved the experience of the game. So the player, a new player who picks up that core box or whatever, they don't need to be inundated with the fact that, oh, everything in there is not good anymore except for the miniatures. You have to download all this stuff, right? You can always be like, hey, I see you're using some of the old cards. That's cool and all. The game still functions, but you can get better ones now for free, right? That unit is better. That unit does different things. The mission system is different. And it's just, understanding that we all went on this journey. If you're a Legion player, you did the exact same thing this new player is doing. They're just going to do it at hyperspeed,
Right.
whereas, we did it over the course of what is it now, 6 years? Coming up on six because it was 2018. Yeah, it was 6 years,
Yeah.
a little over 6 years. So, so those are kind of like my overall, just the
Sure.
advice that I give to people and everything else, right? It is very doable. We've tried to make it as painless and as low cost as possible by providing things for free. There are a couple more steps, but I think the benefit of having a game that can grow and evolve and be better, especially for the existing player base, at the expense, we'll put it in quotes, of it being a little more of a steeper entry point for new players for the next 8 or 9 months,
Mhm.
seemed worth it, right? It seemed very valuable to us
Yeah.
overall because it's great to bring in new players. That's all we ever talk about internally is growing the communities, bringing in new players, finding more hobbyists, and introducing people to these games that we love. But there's no point in introducing new players if there's nobody playing the game,
Yeah.
right? So at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that the community that exists is being nurtured, taken care of, enjoying the games, and we're giving the best game experience we possibly think we can. And then we'll, kind of walk through what that means for that new player coming into the game and try to solve those hurdles as best we can, as fast as we can. But again, the printed product just has certain restrictions on it that you're always kind of playing the do I rob Peter or do I rob Paul this time?
Mhm.
Yeah. I keep telling new players too that are really some people are just really gung ho. They want physical stuff, right? I want the new
Mhm.
physical cards. I said, and you guys have talked about this in our previous interviews too, is that come Adepticon, you guys are going to show us more coming. We will get a
Mhm.
better picture. Like you guys have offhanded just mentioned like a new core set, but it's not obviously been officially shown yet. Well, I have a feeling you don't have to say yes or no to this, but we'll probably see it at Adepticon. Is be my assumption just based off of your past tendencies. So I think
It's a
that will
good
help
guess. It's a good
players kind
guess.
of new players will see
I
that.
wouldn't bet
So,
against it.
new players will see that new core
Yeah.
set coming, and I think that will calm
Mhm.
some people. Like, oh, I can't get
Yeah.
that. It's right there. Here it is.
Right.
It's going to be soon.
Mhm.
So on a slightly lighter note, one of my favorite things from Adepticon last year, because I lost really early and could do other things, was gonk racing. And we talked about this, I think, last time. And
Mhm.
is it going to be back at Adepticon? And are there going to be plans to maybe have it on our
He likes
tables
gonk
or
racing.
tables in other people's houses, maybe at some point?
Mm. So I unfortunately I have to break the news that there is no gonk racing this
Oh
year.
no.
That that doesn't mean that it won't appear again in the future. But one of the things that we really like to do, right, especially in partnership with Adepticon, is provide unique experiences that you can't get anywhere else. And I think that's one of the magical things about conventions, right? If we think
Mhm.
about the folks who go to conventions regularly, there are a lot of experiences, some that are organic, right? Meeting up with friends that you only see at the convention, hanging out with, your favorite adult beverage at 2 in the morning, playing your 50th round of Werewolf with Will Pagani, who just organically formed a massive like fire hazard in the center of the hall, with all these people, or having more structured experiences like gonk racing that a studio with all of the resources that a studio has was able to construct and put on and everything else. But one of the things that makes those special is the fact that you can't just they're not rote, you can't just do them all the time.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's kind of like the Disney Vault, right? If anybody's old enough to remember those hideous
Yeah.
gigantic bubble cassettes
Oh, they're
and their
brutal.
packaging, right? Things would go into the vault and you'd be like, oh no, I can't get Snow White. And then they'd come out of the vault and you'd be like, oh my God, I can get Snow White again. I must get it now. There's
It
a
has so much
magic
more
to,
value.
yeah, exactly. But there's a magic to things that you can't just always have,
Sure.
right? The wonderful thing about, Christmas morning is that it only comes once a year. And if every day was Christmas, yeah, we might all be happier, but the presents wouldn't be as exciting, right? Because you just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna get more stuff today. Um, and so that's kind of what led to the idea that hey, we have other things that we're going to be doing for the games and other events for players to be able to enjoy. And Pagani and his team work really hard on some of that stuff. Maybe he wants to give you a little bit of a spoiler on what to expect from some of those events. Because they're all locked in and ready to go, and I think the schedule's going up soon anyway. But Gonk Racing, we were like, okay, let's put it in the vault and we'll bring it back out later. Could it become something that gets played on a kitchen table? I mean, we all talked about it, right? I think it's all something that we would love to see, and the response to it was really overwhelming. People seem to really love it. But there's no current, it's going to be, woo, here
Sure.
it is on the plate, right? But anything's possible.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we've got anything quite as exciting as an entirely new game like Gonk Racing was planned, but we have plenty of exciting things for the games you all know and love. Legion's got some new mission cards that are going to be Adepticon exclusive.
Oh, cool.
To be clear, I don't mean you can only get them at Adepticon. I mean you can only play them at Adepticon, and then you get to take them home and you can play them casually at your store. This is not like a mission card or anything to use in an event or a tournament or something.
Yeah, there's a brand new exclusive advantage card and a secondary mission, I believe.
I believe that is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And they are Adepticon themed, right? Like these are not these are very specific to Adepticon, and you will see what we mean when we show them.
So one of them is about getting drinks from the cantina. That's very important, whether you're at Adepticon or not.
That's true.
And then I believe the other one involves painted miniatures. So
It does.
because Adepticon has a painting requirement. And then Shatterpoint, I think, has one of the most exciting things happening, which is a whole new narrative campaign where you're going to go through an entire story
Oh, really?
Oh,
of characters and stuff. So that
That's
one is
exciting.
very exciting.
I need more
and-
time at Adepticon.
Yeah, if we get like more days at Adepticon, Shick,
More
Hank would be
days.
cool with that.
That'd be great.
And then that one is like a hero's journey situation that is highly narrative and very, very cool. The guys have knocked it out of the park for sure with that one.
Well, you guys got me excited now. I
Yeah.
want to see what it is.
Can you hook us up with the early sign-ons?
You guys kind of fed right into one of my last questions I always ask you with. Is there anything you want to share or spoil with us that you haven't shared or spoiled with us yet before we let you guys go here shortly? Like, I don't know, Gungans or something. Just off the top of my head.
Just keep pushing, man. Just keep on.
Just keep trying. If you keep saying the word, eventually it'll lose
I
all
was
meaning.
fine until you guys started having art in the background in some of your things, and I was like, wait a minute. That guy's wearing a rebel uniform with a Gungan head. Like,
Wait a minute.
That's kind of dark, actually. I didn't know that one got through.
They introduced Darth Jar Jar already. Come on.
yes,
It's canon.
Star Wars Lego. It's great. It's great.
It has done it. Oh, I don't know. I feel like I've already spoiled so many things, both intentionally and not.
I don't know. Do you want to give them a Jin teaser? Because I know that poor Jin has been talked about a lot with the absolutely cruel changes that you did to her with the relentless charge and I forgot the other one now because it's really late and I'm ready to be done.
I don't feel like poor
Relentless
Jin.
charge and steady.
Steady, that's
Not-
it. Steady.
yeah.
Thank you.
Like that was done so long ago. I gotta go look it up.
Well, you have a computer in front of you.
I'm
so-
doing it right now.
We will gladly talk about something else while you're pulling it up. You take your time, Will. It's perfectly fine. I will say the one thing you said that piqued my interest, because it always does, Gungans and Ewoks are kind of my favorite things, is you mentioned a catapult and a glider. So whether that's coming or not,
Mhm.
be excited. So thanks for that.
Yeah, look, I mean, we watch the films in detail, frame by frame. We absorb everything, like no doubt.
I always thought they were coming because there's a
And-
support like slot on their battlefield.
There is a support slot. There is.
Maybe,
There
maybe.
is. No. It's, we always talk about we're not done, right? We're never done
Never
with
done.
anything. Even if we say we're done, that's probably a lie because there's always more that can be made, right? There's always something that can come up in media that's new, right?
Yeah.
The LFL creators are going to create and they're going to make cool new stuff. And so even if, we think like we have touched everything there is to touch in the Star Wars galaxy and it's all been made and there's nothing new, it just takes one new show. It just takes one new movie. It just takes one new comic, one new novel. And all of a sudden, we have at least a few new things to make or a whole host of new things to make.
Yeah.
So we're always looking at, we always look at the job as it's it's a journey, not a destination,
Mm-hmm.
right? We never really plan for an end. We're sometimes those ends come, for various reasons, and anything could happen, right? When the next meteor could hit the Earth and we could all be, vapor tomorrow. I don't know.
Real
But
quick.
the reality is,
That
right?
was the
Yeah, I know
journey.
it's grim. It's grim. It's grim. But the reality is, right, is that we don't plan for anything to conclude. We always assume that these games will continue and that we'll be working on them, or our successors will be working on them until, humanity reaches the stars and beyond. And we're living in our own Star Wars galaxy. Who knows? So yeah, so Ewok catapults, Ewok gliders, more stuff for Shadow Collective,
Some
new
flag
versions
cannon,
of,
Aegean Oceans.
you know,
That's
the yeah. Would anyone have ever thought that we would be, approaching a time where we would start seeing Grievous on a wheel bike, Luke on a tauntaun, Han on a tauntaun, right? Getting to mounted characters. If you think like a developer, probably, because that's what you do. You're always trying to find where the edge of the sandbox is and then figure out how to go a little bit further.
The
Oh,
lucky thing for you is Star Wars and gamers together are very patient people. You guys are fine.
Super patient. Yeah, yeah.
Understanding.
Take your time.
Yeah. I mean, if you think it's bad on that side, just imagine when all the cool stuff that's coming, but you have to make it first, and it takes 2 years to make it, right?
Oh,
So
I
it's
bet.
it's extra, it's kind of extra excruciating in that way because you're just like, oh, I want them to have it now, and then when it's done, you have to wait until marketing lets you talk about it, right? Or,
that's
or
the
like the
hardest
time is
part,
right.
right?
Yeah, when you're just like, this has been done for months. All we want to do is tell people about it, but you have to wait.
I can only imagine the struggle of You're playing the game like a year and a half from now for what we're playing.
Yeah.
You're
Mhm.
using units that we've never even thought that we were going to play with, and you're just like, oh yeah, you guys are playing with that version of the game. Okay.
I also defend you guys always when like someone like for instance will Pagani like you were like I forgot this keyword and people are always like oh I don't even know the game. No, you guys know the game. The issue is you are working on versions way ahead of us and you have to think back to the current state and people don't think like that sometimes. I'm like that's why that sometimes happens, guys. And you also like govern more than one game too.
Right.
So
We also end up in a situation where it's like, and coordinate's a bad example because that's been in the game forever, right? But like we might be dealing with 5 different versions of the same keyword,
mm.
like with the same name. Like when we changed Tempted is when I know we changed it, that it had a million versions, right? So somebody's like, what does Tempted do? I'm like, I don't know, man. Go look it up.
It does a bunch
Right?
of stuff, but it probably doesn't do it anymore.
Yeah, a
Probably.
lot of things. Honestly, Shick, I am not finding any of these cards, but there's
They're the worst.
So Jin's gonna get better. That's all we know.
Oh, we were
Yeah,
so close,
so-
Bill.
I can talk about the themes without getting any specifics, but she becomes a very annoying melee skirmisher that is very different from her current iteration, including unit cards and command cards completely changing. So
She is one of the biggest reworks, I think, overall, especially in the next batch. Callus and Lando, which we've teased before as to the playtesters really enjoying them. They're definitely different. They have some rebalances to them, some different abilities. But Jin obviously was kind of a ground up rebuild to finally, hopefully, at least as far as our experience with it, make a Jin that feels thematic, accurate to the character, and that has a place and a function within the overall game of Legion. And it, unlike Callus and Lando, there was a lot of back and forth with the playtesting. I mean, she was hotly contentious between a lot of different folks, and we went through a lot of different iterations, which is probably why Pagani can't remember where she wound up. But for people who are worried about, oh, you found it,
Found
you
her.
found it.
Go-
It's too
go
late
ahead,
now,
Will.
though. You said you
No,
couldn't find
no,
it.
it's not too late, Will. Will, we're losing you. Will, please talk.
all right. So I'm gonna say that this is the playtest file. Okay. So it might not be 100% right.
We'll take it.
Agile, disengage, independent, move, infiltrate, and nimble.
Independent move.
Ooh, I like that.
There you go.
Whoa.
That's what you get.
Probably want to throw out the most important bit, which is that she's no longer the commander she once was.
Oh, she's now an operative, yes.
That makes more sense, I think,
Okay,
for her.
that fits a lot better, I think, too.
Yeah. How's all that weapon profile you
So-
see in that card?
I can't quite make it out.
Ah,
I zoomed
so
too
close.
far
Okay.
out, and I don't know how to zoom back in.
Too far. So for anyone who loves Jin, yes, you do have a couple
That's
more
exciting.
or a few more months to wait. But don't worry, we're aware of the fact that she got hit particularly hard by these changes, and she has had a complete rework to become a brand new hero of the rebellion. So there you go. I think that's the biggest delivery on a spoiler I've ever been able to give you, because I had a developer with his development machine.
I love it.
That's awesome.
We'll have both wheels on again. Don't worry, guys. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us. We're at the end of the year. Everyone's winding down for the holidays coming up. So thanks for taking the time with us. We'll happy to have you guys on again. I'm sure we'll see you at Adepticon and maybe
At
interview you
Adepticon,
there again
definitely.
too.
Absolutely.
So looking
Yeah,
forward.
we'll definitely have to catch up at Adepticon and talk about all the cool reveals and everything else. And then, you can cash in on the bet that nobody took with you about new starters, and it'll be wonderful.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Have a great night and happy holiday.
Have a
Thank
good
you so
one.
much, guys. Absolutely. Happy holidays to you too.
Thanks.